Poddin My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Poddin My Noggin. I'm your host, CK Sims, and this week we are joined by Mr. Andrew Davie. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Perfect. So, Andrew's got a lot of things going on, done a lot of things in life. But one of the things that I am interested in talking about is, what is a ruptured brain aneurysm?
So, you can have an aneurysm anywhere in the body, and it's when a blood vessel wall breaks or collapses. Sometimes that's in a vein. It's just when there's a weakened blood vessel that
In the brain.
In the brain, for me, it was on the brainstem.
But that does not sound good.
No, it's not. A lot from what I've learned, a lot of people, and this isn't to scare anyone, will have aneurysms that are unruptured. So what I always tell people is, if you have a family history, it's probably worth getting checked. But
okay.
Most of the time they don't rupture, or they can be taken care of through a procedure that you can have. Mine ruptured because just through being really unlucky, I guess.
So would it have any, was there something that led up to it? Was it genetics? Is it, were you under stress? I'm not sure, how that would play out.
For me, it just happened to be unlucky.
Okay.
There's no history of it in my family. Sometimes it can be exacerbated, like if you have serious cocaine addiction, can sometimes exacerbate it. For me, it just happens to be, it was like getting struck by lightning. The one particular area was just weak enough and it burst. But there wasn't anything, there was no context really that led to that happening.
So I'm assuming that ruptured brain is just the blood vessel breaks and the blood comes into the brain itself.
Yeah. So what happened with me is I was about to board a plane. I didn't have any symptoms until I got to the airport, and I got to my gate, and I just started to sweat uncontrollably, to the point where I should have probably saw it as a major red flag. But this is 2018, so this is before COVID. So I was thinking, okay, I'm getting a cold maybe, or the flu. And then when they called my group to board and I lifted my bag, it felt like there were cinder blocks in there. So those were the only two symptoms. Most people, if they have a ruptured brain aneurysm, they'll get something called a thunderclap headache, which is apparently the worst headache you've ever had. I was really lucky that I didn't have any pain. It was just the sweating, and when I tried to move, the floor began to shift. So I fell, and because I was on the jetway trying to board a plane, first responders could get to me very quickly. So what had happened is a blood vessel on my brainstem had burst, and then you begin bleeding what's known as a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So in between the brain and the skull, you start to accumulate blood,
which creates pressure.
From what I've learned with just the numbers, most people don't survive. Probably 60 to 75% of people don't survive that, or they die on the way to the hospital. So again, for me, I'm in the 99th percentile in terms of the fact that I survived, and the physical limitations I have are very minimal.
So what's recovery of this? So like you're this happens on the jet path. First responders get to you because you fall.
Mm-hmm.
You remain conscious in this process, I'm assuming.
So I was conscious. I fell, and someone said, "Don't move," and I thought, "Okay, I won't move." And then I was dragged onto a crash pad, and someone put a neck brace on, and I said, "I can't miss my flight," because all I could think about was how worried my mother was going to be. And after that, I passed out. So I don't have any memories of what happened from that point on till the next 3 weeks. So I had surgery. They were able to contact. I was taking the plane to go see my parents. So while I was in surgery, one of the physician's assistants found my phone and saw a bunch of missed calls. So he called my family and said what had happened. So they made plans to come up to Virginia, where I am. So I was in intensive care for the next 3 weeks because they had to. I still wasn't out of the woods yet. So, and I have no memory of any of that time. But I was up talking to people. I was alert, or not cognizant, but I have seen videos of me having conversations with people that I don't have any memory of.
Did they have to release the pressure by doing?
Yeah, I mean I'm not they the procedure that they did, they used something called onyx,
Okay.
which from what I understood is like it's a liquid that hardens. So they were able to inject that, and I guess it acted as a band-aid for the rupture.
Okay.
And I had to have a drain on my head, so I'm guessing that the drain acted as a way to relieve pressure and allow for, whatever happened.
So they probably created a burr hole, inserted the drain. So interesting. I find this very fascinating. Not to like sensationalize what you experienced,
No.
but like I'm the weird person who will sit down and like watch a knee surgery, because I find it all really fascinating how our bodies can heal themselves.
Mm-hmm.
One, two, how humans have learned the very fine art of keeping people alive, right?
Yeah. I when I was so subsequently, I've had to have at the first year anniversary, I had to have an angiogram to make sure everything was okay, and
Yes.
then
Okay.
every 2 years after that, I have a CAT scan. Um, and my brother happens to be a doctor, so when I had my last CAT scan, he asked if my doctor had actually gone through the results with me, other than just saying everything was okay. So he basically went through and uh, translated all of the medical jargon, which I found was bad. Apparently I'm missing parts of my brain now because it had, it was damaged. It became damaged tissue that was reabsorbed. So, and growing up, I used to play a video game called Life and Death 2, The Brain, where you could perform, amongst other things, you could perform an aneurysm surgery.
I feel like I remember something similar to this, maybe.
There was Life and Death where you could perform an appendectomy, and then Life and Death 2 was focused on the brain. But yeah, it was very. You're an intern at a teaching hospital, so it's funny how life tends to be circular in this way.
Yes. So they've moved things around. So I just had a small panic. So I'm like looking down where I'm normally looking to track time, and it's not there. And I'm like, we're not recording, but we are recording. So because here we are. But so the 3 weeks after that you were in ICU, you don't remember now, and that's fine. But like when you left ICU after suffering this brain hemorrhage or ruptured brain aneurysm, what was recovery like? And what was different for you in capacity wise after versus before?
So, so 3 weeks in ICU that I don't remember, and then the next 10 days I was in recovery at the hospital. So every day was physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. Um, I really couldn't, I didn't have the best coordination and I didn't have much endurance. So I would participate in the physical therapy exercises, but then need a break afterward. I think the biggest celebration was I was able to walk a full lap around the hallway without stopping. Um, and when I got back home to my apartment, I started doing outpatient therapy. But it was basically like I was starting over. It's not like I had to learn how to rewalk again, but I needed a cane, and I would have to stop. I had a guard belt that someone would hold on to in case I began to teeter. Um, and my abstract thinking was gone. So I would complete these worksheets where you'd have to make inferences, and it was really difficult to make those inferences. And then a few weeks later, it just suddenly came back. I was suddenly able to do it. So I had assumed, and most of my physical recovery took place within that first year. I didn't, after a while, I didn't need the cane anymore. I was able to walk more significant distances. My abstract thinking came back. Initially, I had double vision, so I had to wear an eye patch, and then eventually I didn't need that anymore.
Okay.
So the physical recovery, and I'm going to give a lot of credit to the fact that I had just turned 40. So because I was still in good shape and relatively young, I don't think it was as big of a deal. The biggest obstacle for me was the emotional recovery that happened after the physical recovery. I had assumed it would all happen at the same time, but suddenly I was faced with, okay, what do I do now? In terms of, I had been a teacher beforehand, and teaching was always a way to pay the bills while I could try to publish fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know if I could do that anymore, or if I would get any enjoyment from teaching anymore. Um, my ability to make emotional connections seemed to have been blunted, where I didn't process joy the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So those were all sorts of things that now I needed to think about that really weren't problems before.
That makes sense, and I think that that's really important. Like to because so I think a lot of people would just look and think, maybe without going too deep, is like, okay, you had this brain aneurysm, you were out of commission for say approximately 4.5 weeks, and then you started getting life back. So like you're alive, right? However, there are changes, loss, like loss of when I say vision, not because you did have a double vision issue, but loss of life vision, like what you probably thought you were going to be doing for the next X number of years, or what you thought your life might look like in the next year, or all of those particular things. And then because of this experience, it also impacts it makes us more vulnerable and more susceptible and more aware that we're not invincible as human beings, that things can happen. And I think also there's that anger, that why did it happen? Like there's a lot of emotions that would go into that. And that makes sense to me. Um, so what did you choose? Like, what was that process for you when you started realizing that all of these things were now what ifs?
It was difficult. I really needed to lean on my family for support. Um, at one point, I had a Post-it note at my desk that read, "Rome wasn't built in a day," that I would have to look at all the time to remind me that this was going to take time. Um, and what ended up actually being COVID turned out to be the thing that allowed me to just focus exclusively on recovering. I had gotten a job as a tutor because the classroom I thought would be too overwhelming, but I could work one-on-one with someone. And that job was supposed to start in April of 2020, and it got canceled. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a little over a year. And at that point, I could just kind of recover. I didn't have to think about meals or paying bills or any, I could just sort of stay. And that's what allowed me to really reflect and find, teaching wasn't going to be what allowed me to stay fulfilled. I did manage to publish a book at a small press that came out in 2019, and that didn't drastically change my life as I had anticipated. So suddenly it became like, okay, well, what is out there that could give you fulfillment? And I decided to become a clinical mental health counselor because I realized that when I was struggling, hearing from other people that what they were going through during their brain injury recoveries wasn't unique to me. So hearing from someone on a message board say, oh, I also don't remember most of my dreams anymore. That's a typical response. And I think I figured if I could help people feel less alone while they were struggling, then that would be something fulfilling. So
you just said something that piqued my. You said lots of really great things, but so you don't. So after this, you don't remember your dreams, or if you dream,
I will sometimes remember my dreams, not as much as I used to before. But typically, it's I used to remember the majority of my dreams when I would wake up the next day, and now I don't. If I remember something, I'm pretty sure that it was important or was on my. It was something that stood out so that I would remember it.
I think it just makes me think a little bit about how I'm sure if you asked anybody, everyone's trained to protect their heads, right? Like if you're going to fall, if you're in an accident, like that sort of thing. However, I still think that we as humans take for granted how fragile our brains can be, and how something like if we had a blood vessel break on our arm or our leg or something like that, it's going to be painful and it's going to hurt and whatever is going to happen, but like we'll recover to the extent, but we'll still have our brain will still process the information that we has to process. So I think that we take it for granted because it's just there. Yeah, I think it's a helpful reminder. So you said you wanted to become a counselor so that you could help these people not feel alone. Becoming a counselor is not an easy feat, I would imagine. It's not like something you just wake up one morning and be like, I'm going to be a counselor. There's steps to take to get there. My question just before break is, were you scared or nervous about how you would get through that particular program having suffered this ruptured brain aneurysm?
Not really. I mean, one of the real, again, and I think about this all the time because I'm friendly with people who are recovering from brain injuries, who have very limited cognitive functioning, or they can't, they only have a certain amount of time that they can dedicate to something before they need to take a break. And I don't have any of those problems. So I wasn't really concerned going back to school. Going into it, I didn't think I would need any accommodations. I find that I can spend hours upon hours working on something and I don't need to take a break. So I sort of looked at it like it was an opportunity to finally do something that I thought would provide fulfillment. It would probably be tricky. I would, my guess was I would be on the older side of the students that I would be taking classes with, but I didn't think that would be a problem by any stretch. So for me, I tended to look at it like, okay, this is the opportunity. This is an opportunity for something great.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Partner today with CK Sims and Poddin My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, we were talking to Andrew Davie, and we were going through and covering something traumatic, actually. He had a ruptured brain aneurysm. I'm doing some math in my head. I would say approximately 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, just from
Well, no,
some of the
7
years ago.
Yeah.
Recovered, was looking for fulfillment. Got the opportunity to recover through COVID that first year, which I think that was the universe looking out for you, friends, in the sense that you were able to move back with your parents and really just focus on the healing process. And then the wanting to do something fulfilling part with your life, because you were a teacher before, you had published a book, you enjoyed writing fiction, all of these things, and you just didn't know if that was going to cut it or if you were going to be able to do that anymore. So you chose to go into mental health counseling. How long was that program?
So I did it full time, which typically is about 2 years. My mother ended up getting sick. She was diagnosed with ALS during that, so I actually moved back in with my parents to become her caregiver. Probably in June of 2023. So I had been in the program for a year and a half already. So it ended up taking me a little bit longer because I needed to do the rest of it virtually. So there were more hoops to jump in. But yeah, you had mentioned the universe sort of looking out for me. Being able to take care of my mother turned out to be the fulfilling thing that I had been looking for. And the fact that that I process emotions differently was helpful because of how tragic her situation was. I didn't get emotionally overwhelmed when things were difficult. So it became really interesting to kind of view things through a big, I changed my perspective. I would sometimes think about, there's a Taoist parable where a farmer has a horse and the son tries to train the horse and gets thrown and breaks his leg. And the farmer's neighbor said, "Oh, that's so awful, your son's broken his leg." And the farmer says, "Well, let's see." And the next day the army comes to take all the young men to fight, and they can't take the son because he has a broken leg. So while I would often lament the fact that my emotional processing was blunted and I was missing out on experiencing joy the same way, when it came time to help my mother live a better quality of life, I could do that without being emotionally overwhelmed. So there were silver linings along the way. Eventually I did graduate, and now I'm working as a licensed graduate professional counselor, working towards being independently licensed. I'm still trying to kind of figure out, now that unfortunately my mother passed in September, so I'm still sort of trying to figure out what's going to be that next
Of
fulfilling
course.
thing. But I also know that the universe is probably going to present something that will be it. It probably won't look like what I'm expecting. I've
It never is.
that's one thing that I've learned about this whole experience that I forget all the time. Just that often you'll be given what you need. It just may not match your expectation of what you think it should be. So
I love that. So like, you made a statement about how I love that parable about the training the horse and the son not being picked for the army because his leg was broken. And then, but I loved how you said, you weren't able to process joy the same way as you used to, but this also prevented you from becoming emotionally overwhelmed. So really, it's the opposite. You weren't able to process sadness
mhm.
the same way as you used to. But I think there's a part of you that probably puts that on just the brain aneurysm, but there's something that's telling me that it's also got to do a lot with your character.
It's very difficult for me these days to separate the two.
Makes
Um,
sense.
I've gotten so one of the only physical limitations I have right now is that my balance still isn't 100%, and if I move my head laterally, I have to wait for my vision to settle. Um,
Okay.
Fortunately, I don't get nauseated, so but it's been 7 years now, so I've just adjusted to if I spin around 180 degrees, I have to wait a second before I move my foot because I will.
Thoughtful.
It's like stepping off of a merry-go-round.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, but yeah, now I don't. I used to try to compare my situation all the time. Like, okay, 5 years ago, what would this experience have been like? How would you have felt this? Euphoric. Would this have been a euphoric feeling? Would this have been? And now I don't really do that so much anymore. So,
I think that that's good.
oh
I think
yeah,
that's a healing process right there, is because you're, on one hand, you don't function the same way you did 7+ years ago before this incident. But on the other hand, there's still so much of you that exists. It's just you're processing it differently than it was before.
mm-hmm.
And that's what my comment about your character was. I don't know who you were prior to 7 years ago or prior to 30 minutes ago, but there's something in the way you speak and you present yourself that tells me that there's character there, right? And that is how, in my eyes, that character plays a part in your healing process and your journey. So, I mean, going back to your mom, you said you had found that to be the thing that you were looking for in fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, ultimately, what greater thing can anyone do but to help a dying parent maintain their quality of life and be there for them, right? Um, that's another character speaking piece, right? So, like,
Yeah, it was interesting because my I basically was going to visit my parents for July 4th weekend, and my father pulled me aside and said, because originally they had an aide come in from like 9 to 3, who would help out, and at this time my mother could still do things on her own. Um, she could still walk and talk. She needed a walker, but she could still get around. But my father would basically take care of her at night. And he had just turned 81. So for him, being a caregiver was very difficult. So when I came to visit, he pulled me aside and said how this was getting to be really difficult. They would probably need to switch to 24-hour care, which they could have. But I also suggested me being there would just alleviate a lot of the burdens for everyone. Um, Plus, I really enjoyed the time I got to spend with them. And I don't know of very many people in their mid 40s who have a good relationship with their parents who get to spend every day with them. Um, so again, things, I had always anticipated growing up that one day I would get married and have my own family. That had been a primary motivating factor in a lot of the decisions I'd made. Uh, and again, because of the aneurysm and the emotional blunting, it didn't seem like it was as much of a priority anymore. But the
Hmm.
fact that I didn't have children or a spouse meant that I could easily move back in to take care of my mother and then basically help my father. Um, so it was interesting how all of these pieces of the puzzle kind of lined up
I have a
together.
question for you.
Mhm.
Were you always the silver lining?
Was I always?
Yeah. Were you always someone who found the silver lining?
Uh, Not immediately. I don't.
Fine.
I think it was probably difficult sometimes to see the silver. I think now I'm sort of, at least in the beginning after the aneurysm, I was uh, forced to see the silver lining a little bit more. Um,
Let me ask you a different question,
sure.
just slightly. Were you always so reflective?
No.
No? Okay.
No. I think as a result of this experience, I think I've become much more philosophical, reflective, spiritual. Um, Previously, I don't think that was something I would consciously think about.
That makes sense to me. The very reason why I created the show is your story, right? How would you how would you categorize your life today?
Well, I think of the phrase "playing with house money," um, and I and sometimes I forget this because it's very easy to get caught up in the day to day things. But I am extremely lucky to be here, and the fact that I have the opportunity to make the most of it is is really incredible. And as a result of that, I tend to be like, once I stop to actually think about things, I am so much more grateful about the opportunity. Um,
I I think that that's normal though. You say that, but I think that part's normal. Like when something happens to me, even though I've done a lot of healing work and I've gotten to where I am today, and I'm a very grateful person by nature today. I have not always been. Um, when something first happens, I don't immediately go to silver lining for sure, without question, because I think there's a necessary sort of your body's going to react. You're going to go through that slew of emotions, and then some people it might take a month, people it might take a week, some people it might take an hour. You know, it's different for everybody. I think that's really a normal thing. But you are in like when I started the show, I wanted to create a space where people who have gone through great adversity and or trauma and have come out the other end defining their own version of success, right? Because we all know what the societal subscription of success is, but it's not success for everybody. So when I ask you how would you categorize your life and you say you're very grateful, would you say that you are successful?
yes, a lot of what you had just talked about, the societal expectations. I was very fortunate growing up. No one ever enforced them on
Mm-hmm.
me, but I would enforce them on myself. Like,
How do we do that?
this is what success looks like. It's the house in the suburbs with the spouse and the car and the 2.5 children. Um, you know, Now I look at myself as successful because I'm doing everything I want to be doing. Um, it's funny, like I have virtual coffee with a friend of mine who lives in Illinois, and she's married. But we have a really wonderful, supportive friendship that I get the things that I had only thought were reserved for someone who would be my spouse. Okay, you're going to find your spouse somewhere and she'll provide this supportive, wonderful friendship, relationship, whatever. Um, but you have to get married because otherwise you can't have that. So I'm successful because I have that now with uh, someone who I never thought would assume that role because I didn't think it was um, the way it worked. So the aneurysm has also kind of debunked my thinking. It's undone a lot of the conditioning I had about what success is, um, what fulfillment is, what are the things that are going to provide for that for you.
I think too that we operate. It's amazing that you didn't have someone in your life enforcing those subscriptions, but we usually have very narrow definitions for so many different things, not just success, but what love might look like, or what a friendship's supposed to be, or how a career is supposed to go, or whatever the situation may be, or how life is supposed to unfold. Very narrow. And I find that those who have faced adversity tend to be forced to step back and realize, hold up a second, life is not about all of these things. And what's interesting is you're talking about the house in the suburbs and stuff like that. So that's not my definition of success, but I still want that, right? And I think that that's the difference. You can still want to have a house in the suburbs, but if you can recognize that you're successful and you're happy and you're grateful for what you have right now, then that's life right there. You're mastering life in that moment. So you have completed your program. You're doing what I'm from Canada, so I would call this like your supervised hours, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, so supervised hours as a counselor. How have you experienced that shift in now being the person to sit and listen and help others sort of unpack their own experiences and trauma?
Well, I'd been doing an internship for the last year, so I've been seeing clients since then. I find that I draw upon my own experiences a lot,
Mm-hmm.
which I have found to be helpful. But there is also something really that I wasn't able to find elsewhere. Knowing that you're helping someone deal with adversity um, just provides a sense of solace that hadn't, I don't really find elsewhere. Um, and on the days where I feel like I need to pick me up, it's always rewarding to know that that's something that I can do that's helpful.
I love that so much because I absolutely 100% recognize what you're saying. Helping others face challenges head on, being in their corner, holding space, developing that therapeutic alliance, right, with individuals. I think it's almost as if you're taking, and it's a dangerous word to say, so like don't take it out of context, but it's almost a little bit like an aspirin for the weary soul. When you help someone, it tends to like just make that your soul feel that much better. And um, where I'm not a counselor, so I don't counsel people, but in a similar fashion, I get that same sort of aspirin from having these conversations, right, with incredible people who have been through some not so incredible things or have had some not so incredible things happen to them, but really in the end come out winning because they didn't let that experience define them or stop them from continuing. Like 7 years ago, there's 3 weeks that you don't remember, but now 7 years later, you've done a lot with your life in that 7 years. So, and I have a feeling you're going to continue to do a lot with your life. So I'm being mindful of the time, but I want people to know that you do many things. I have to go get all your things. So, so you're now focused on the counseling component as a full-time job. That's your
Yeah,
calling now.
I'm trying to build my client roster.
Of course, and that takes time,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And I love the idea too that you can be someone who, because we talk about in counseling and therapy a lot, having therapists who can be, say, culturally in tuned with a particular client, or someone who's trauma informed, all of those particular things. I love how you have this conduit where people who are struggling to figure out life post brain injury or aneurysm, that you can pull from that, and that could become a niche of yours where you're really connecting with people who are like you. Because I find in therapy, sometimes when you walk into a therapist office, and I've been in many therapist offices, I'm a huge proponent for therapy, first and foremost. Sometimes when you walk in, you wonder, are they even going to understand what I'm going through? Are they going to get the complexity or the severity? And while I do believe that a properly trained therapist can hold space for anyone, it makes a little extra difference for some people who want to know that they're sitting down with someone who understands what they're going through, right?
Sure.
But so you currently co-host a music review show.
Yeah, with my friend Heather, the person in Illinois who I was telling you about.
Okay, wonderful. That's amazing. And that show is called, I know I saw it here somewhere, Happy Hour.
Yeah, Happy Hour with Heather and Guest.
Yes, and so you also write fiction novellas and
Mm-hmm.
short stories. Where could people, and there you have a website, that's what I was looking for. So Andrew Davie, and I want people to go there. I'll also put it in the description as well. So andrew.davie, DAVIE.com. Did I say that right?
I think it's a dash. Andrew
It is a
dash.
dash.
Yeah,
It was, you see,
so
um,
it's all good.
yeah, but this is the aging process. So andrew-davie.com is what I meant to say. There's a ton of things on here, lots of writing. Um, yeah, so you want to check that out. And you're finishing up, like, how long before you're like full-fledged,
Well,
fully licensed?
I still have over 1,000 hours to go,
Of
so
course,
it's gonna. I'm guessing a few years.
perhaps. Or things might come at you a little bit quicker. We don't
Yeah, if
know.
there's one thing I've learned, it's you never know.
Well, that this is true, and the universe seems like it keeps showing up for you. So maybe it's going to show up for you in this way as well. Group counseling counts towards your hours, does it not?
It does.
Yes. So, like, where are you located? That's the part that I'm curious about now, because I know
Well,
you said you were in Virginia, but
so I'm in Virginia. I'm the practice I'm working for. I'm working for virtually there in Maryland.
okay,
So I'm being licensed in Maryland. Um,
okay.
so my clients would basically need to reside in Maryland for now until I get independently licensed, and then we'll see where I choose to practice.
Of course. So I mean, like do your thing, right? Be you, and then hold group sessions. Oh my gosh, so many things that you can do. Um, but then for people out there who are in the Maryland area, look up Andrew Davie. Go have a session with Andrew Davie, and he'll pull from his experience and his education and be able to help you in life. Therapies. I think every single person in the world should have at least 3 therapy sessions. And my thought process is this: if everybody in the world had at least 3 therapy sessions with a good therapist, right, we wouldn't have half the shit that we're seeing happen in the world that we're seeing today, right? Because healing is messy, but it's wonderful when you start to get on the other side. So you're doing that. You're focusing on your hours. You're writing your stories. You're doing your podcast. What is next? Do you have something?
No, that's sort of the next question. I'm. It's been a little bit of an adjustment when I was taking care of my mother. Um, you know, most of my day was dictated for me. And I sort of got used to that. And now I have the luxury of putting my own needs first, but there's a lot of, deciding what to do. So I'm trying to figure out what the next step is.
Well, who knows? The universe might send, anybody listening and you're in the Virginia area and potentially the Maryland area. Andrew is an eligible bachelor, right? So, who knows, right?
We will see.
We will see, of course. The world is your oyster. Listen, I am so grateful that you came on the show and shared your story with us. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I do wish you the absolute best in all of your future endeavors.
Thank you.
And like I said, everybody, if you're in the Maryland area and want to explore therapy, or if you've been in therapy and you just need a tune-up, because I go for those on a regular basis, look up Andrew Davie and see if you can get a session virtually with him. And then go to Andrew-Davie, DAVIE.com. And I have a puppy underneath me.
Yeah,
at this
it's
moment.
all good.
Andrew-Davie.com and check out all of his work and learn more. Thank you again for being here, Andrew.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
You too. And for everybody at home, get out there and live your wildest dreams. Until next time.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.